We officially have fantasy playoffs starting next week and in some cases this week. So if they're starting next week, there's been massive changes to fantasy football defenses. And if you're starting playoffs this week, you should fix that heading into next year. But we're going to go through the top 12 fantasy football playoff defense rankings for weeks 15 through 17. And I'm already one of the only fantasy YouTubers who covers defense multiple times a week to give you that edge. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, getting into our first tier, I still feel really good about the top two defenses, but I did reorder them from when I originally ranked these two defenses. I've got the Texans at 1 now and the Seahawks at 2. So with the Texans, this is a defense that just had one of their worst days against the Indianapolis Colts in week 13. When it comes down to it, I don't really see it affecting them from the long-term perspective in fantasy. First of all, this defense has been absolutely tremendous this year. 34 sacks in 12 games, 12 interceptions, 8 forced fumbles, 2 defensive touchdowns. Like, they are a dominant defense. And it's not only just about the turnovers and the plays necessary for fantasy points. It's also that they just hold their opponents to so few points. And I've also said this as well. Houston is one of the toughest places to play in all of the NFL. So when you look at their schedule, Arizona at home, the Raiders at home, and then they have the Los Angeles Chargers in LA. That's the only tough matchup that I see on the schedule here. And what we'll go through in the next following tiers is teams with better schedules. But when you factor in the two beautiful matchups at the beginning of the fantasy playoffs right here, and you also factor in how elite their defense has been, they've got to be number one for me. And with the Seahawks, listen, I think their defense is actually better for fantasy football because they have that ceiling of 30 points, which is basically what they got you in week 13 versus the Minnesota Vikings. But I will say their schedule is just much tougher, and you cannot disagree with me on this one. First of all, again, the Seahawks defense, they do everything right for fantasy football. They have 40 sacks in 12 games, 13 interceptions, 5 forced fumbles, 3 defensive touchdowns, and 2 special teams touchdowns as well. Now, those special team touchdowns, obviously, those are a little bit more rare, especially without the returner Torrey Horton in there right now. But the Seahawks defense is absolutely fantastic for fantasy. That's why these two defenses belong in a tier by themselves, because they're tremendous defenses. But this schedule is just a little bit tougher. Versus the Colts, I actually don't mind that one. I think that's actually arguably the easiest one on there. In Seattle, with the way Daniel Jones has looked lately, I do think that one's beatable. The Los Angeles Rams, that's obviously a tough one. But the first time they played the Rams, they held them pretty well. And if you think of all things considered, I think that could happen again in Seattle. And then they go to Carolina to take on the Panthers. That could go either way. We just saw the Panthers do really well against the Los Angeles Rams, so I don't think they're the easiest matchup in the world, but I do think they're all adding up to a spot where I cannot rank the Seahawks defense outside of this tier, but I did make that switch and put the Texans at 1. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got the Jaguars defense making a massive surge, and I'll be honest with you guys here. This entire season has just been a lack of belief in the Jaguars as a team, as a defense, just as an operation as a whole. So they have been left out a lot of times out of my top 12 defense rankings, and that was wrong. I've been really wrong on the Jaguars for a long time because they're the number 5 defense in fantasy right now. 24 sacks through 12 games, not their best number. What's really been holding them up is 13 interceptions through 12 games. That's fantastic right there. They get an interception at least once a game, and they have 7 forced fumbles as well. They've done a lot of things really well, and they're starting to hold opponents to basically lower scoring games, right? So then you look at their schedule and what they've got going on during the playoffs, and there's really good opportunities. Obviously, the Jets matchup at home, that really is one that you would consider a top 3 to 5 play on that week. But then they go to Denver. Now, that's not the easiest place to play. That's one of the toughest. And Denver's offense can put up points, but Bo Nix makes mistakes. And that's one of those circumstances where even if Denver puts up 30 points, if Bo throws an interception and then they can get another fumble recovery off of them, they've actually made enough plays to be viable that week in fantasy and not be a complete disaster. Then they go to Indy. And in those divisional games, you never know what can happen. And at Indianapolis, with the way their offense is looking lately, I don't view that as the worst matchup. So the Jags, this really comes down to me just saying I've been wrong on the Jags. And what we're seeing is actually real. And I don't think I can ignore it any longer. And when I look at the Bucs at 4 and the Saints at 5, I've got to put the Jags over them. Now, listen, the Bucs actually, I pointed this out last time we did these rankings. Their defense is not bad for fantasy football. It's really not. They're the number 12 defense in fantasy right now because they've got 29 sacks, they've got 11 interceptions, and 8 forced fumbles, and 2 defensive touchdowns, and they threw in a safety there too. Like, it's not always about, with fantasy defenses, the fact that you have this defense that lets up a lot of points. If you have Todd Bowles as your defensive coordinator, well, basically what's going to happen is you're going to have aggressive schemes to create turnovers, and that's what the Bucs do. But then you look at the schedule, right? And we'll get into the Saints here in a minute, but it's very similar. The Bucs schedule is tremendous. They go at home versus the Atlanta Falcons. That offense is in shambles. Kirk Cousins is Mermaid Man. I was right about it. At Carolina is their next matchup. Divisional matchup, it could change a lot of things. I do see the potential of a blowout game here against the Carolina Panthers if everything hits right. I'm not as scared of divisional matchups because they get weird. And then at Miami, I do think that all 3 of those matchups have easily beatable opportunities in there. And considering their opportunistic nature as a defense, they've got to be here. And then the Saints defense. Listen, this is purely based on schedule, and I cannot bring myself to not have them in this tier. Because if you just look at what they've done, they're not actually the worst defense either. They're the number 18 defense on the year. 28 sacks, 7 interceptions, 9 forced fumbles, 2 defensive touchdowns. They can make plays. They can. It's not my favorite defense on here. It's probably my least favorite defense on this season, on this entire rankings. But this schedule cannot be ignored. Versus Carolina, which again, divisional matchups can get weird. So I'm not exactly off of this one. Versus the Jets, it's fantastic. And then they go to Tennessee to take on the Titans. Like, those last 2 alone are exactly what powers them to this ranking. And with the potential of the matchup going in their favor against Carolina, I can't find a way to not put them in this area. I'm sorry, but I've got them both over the Steelers. And listen, I had to find it in me to not rank the Steelers outside of this list just out of pure spite and pure disgust of the Steelers and what they've become under Mike Tomlin. And I'm on board with the Fire Tomlin chance. Been calling for it since 2016. I am a Steelers fan. I know it doesn't sound like it a lot. I'm just used to winning. But the bottom line is, guys, I'm trying to help you win your fantasy championships. And the Steelers defense, whether you like it or not, and I don't like this, but they are a very turnover-happy defense that has massive upside weeks. I mean, we've seen it alone in 2025. They've had 16-point weeks. They've had 18-point weeks, 21-point weeks. They generate tons of turnovers, tons of pressure on the quarterback via blitzing, and that's exactly where things go really well in certain matchups for the Steelers. So they have 34 sacks through 12 games. They've got 10 interceptions and 15 forced fumbles and 3 defensive touchdowns. You just can't ignore those types of numbers because in fantasy football for defense, all those numbers, they matter. And especially if you were giving up a lot of points, you need all those turnovers and all those mistakes made to capitalize on a good fantasy performance. So then they play the Dolphins at home. And I've always said this, with the Dolphins at this time of the year, if you get them out of their comfort zone and into cold weather, that's when they look their worst. That's an ideal matchup for the Steelers at home on Monday night. At Detroit, you want to avoid that one for sure. But then they go to Cleveland to take on the Browns. If they play Shador, they're going to get mistake-prone opportunities. If they play Dylan Gabriel, they're not going to score many points. There's 2 good matchups in here that I cannot overlook. And again, I would love nothing more than to just destroy the Steelers because nobody else will. But I can't do that in this segment because I'm trying to help you win a championship, and the Steelers are probably one of the 6 or 8 best defenses for the playoff run. But I will say this, there's a lot of defenses on here, like the Saints, the Bucs, possibly the Jags, possibly the Steelers, that are on waivers right now. It has never been more important than to utilize an automatic waiver wire tool, which we have developed on our site. And it has never been more important to go beat everyone else on the waiver wire after priority waivers run through and everybody gets up at 3 a.m. to go grab the rest of the best remaining players. That's where our system has come in. You can utilize our system on our site and sleep through the night and beat everyone to the waiver wire. Wake up to an angry text from your buddy saying, "How did you beat me again?" That's what you can do with our tool. So on top of that, you get my top 250 rankings on a weekly basis. You also get access to the comparison feature and the league sync up feature on our site. And if you refer a friend to our site as well, you and your friend will get a free month entirely free. And also, if you just want to do a full team breakdown for me to prepare yourself from the playoffs, we could do it on a live stream and have a live back and forth dialogue on ways to make your team better and completely ready to get a championship this year. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got the Lions defense at number 7, and I will tell you this, the Lions defense is one of those defenses that I feel like I've been a little bit on an island with for a good part of the season. For a while, the Lions defense did look like the strength of that team. Lately has not gone well. Like, they have not done well. They've been getting a lot of injuries stacking up on that side of the ball, and their fantasy performances of recently not been good. 32 sacks through 12 games, though, 11 forced fumbles, 9 interceptions, a safety, and a special teams touchdown. Like, they have potential to do a lot of good things for fantasy. I just think, again, when you look at this schedule right here, if I factor in the injuries and how bad they've been performing lately, I can't keep them out much longer than this. At Los Angeles Rams, avoid that matchup. But then they get the Steelers at home, and their offense is abysmal right now. You cannot tell me that the Steelers are not an offense you want to target as a defense for fantasy. And then they go to Minnesota to play the Vikings. That is one of the worst quarterback situations, if not the worst in the entire league, and they've become a team that you want to target for fantasy defense. Those last two matchups right there, if you advance to week 16, you've got to pick up the Lions defense, in my opinion. They cannot be ignored for these types of matchups right here. The Eagles defense is at 8, and recently they haven't done great work either. And the Eagles, I will tell you, are a little bit of a scary play right now. The Eagles defense have not been coming up with massive big plays as of the last couple of weeks in fantasy. So I do wonder if their team is just kind of falling apart right now, because their sack total has been low all year. It had been getting better since they got Jalen Phillips, but they've had a rough hiatus these last 2 weeks. And I will say this, if they had a tougher schedule, they wouldn't be on here. But I think all of these matchups are beatable. So first of all, the Raiders matchup at home in the first week of the playoffs, that propels them up to where they are alone. Because that matchup, everybody needs to take advantage of. And then they go to Washington to play the Commanders. By that time, maybe Jaden Daniels is playing, and it's not as good of an opportunity. But either way, I think they can be taken advantage of from an offensive line perspective and from a turnover perspective. And maybe they just don't put up that many points. And then they go to Buffalo to play the Bills. On the surface, maybe it sounds tough, but we've all seen the Bills make mistakes this year, get Josh Allen sacked this year, and just not put up that many points on the board. My point on it is this. The Eagles are definitely in rough shape right now, but they've got 3 opportunities here to play really bad offenses. And I'm not saying that the Commanders are always bad and the Bills are always bad. The Raiders are always bad, but the Bills and the Commanders are beatable. And that's why I think I'd rather take the shot on them than defenses in the bottom tier. Now, the Rams defense rounds out this tier at number 9, and their defense has been awesome for fantasy football, basically outside of 1 week. And that week was this past week against the Panthers, where they pulled off one of the biggest flops of the week. They weren't bad or anything like that from an offensive perspective, but from a defensive perspective, they got worked against the Panthers. But it has not been how the year has gone for them. They're the number 3 defense in fantasy because of 33 sacks through 12 games, 12 interceptions, 10 forced fumbles, and a defensive touchdown. They've just held a lot of opponents to not many points. Like, this past week was a blip on their record that I'm willing to overlook because of what the opportunity is in certain matchups here. Versus Detroit, probably want to stay away from that one. I don't think that's going to be the greatest, but I will say maybe that's a sneaky one. But I know these last 2 are good. At Seattle sounds weird because of the Seahawks and how well they've done, but if you remember, the Seahawks have done awful against the Los Angeles Rams in recent years. And with Sam Darnold, they know how to work this guy. They got him to throw 4 interceptions the last time they played. That's a great opportunity. And then at Atlanta, that team is just a mess. So the Rams defense, when you factor in what they've done, when you factor in those last 2 games, I can't keep them outside of the top 10. But dropping down to that last tier, here's where I have some real uncertainty. The Patriots are at number 10, and their defense has been hot and cold, mostly just kind of lukewarm actually, with that defense. They're the number 8 defense in fantasy. Haven't played yet on Monday night. They're playing the Giants, so we'll see how that goes. But through 12 games, 25 sacks, 8 interceptions, 5 forced fumbles, 2 defensive touchdowns, and 2 special teams touchdowns. Like, they have not done that well, and they are not forcing that many turnovers and that many big plays. But they've played a really bad schedule as well. And that's kind of why I'm wondering what's going to happen during this playoff stretch. Because they play the Bills at home. We know that that could go one of either way. Because the first time they played the Bills, they actually did not do bad in defense. And then they go to Baltimore to play the Ravens. That matchup, all of a sudden, not quite as scary to me with the way Lamar Jackson is looking. Because he is far from 100% healthy and he won't be getting much better. So I do think that's a beatable matchup as well. And then they go to the Jets to play them. And I think that matchup could be easily taken advantage of. So I think that there's a couple opportunities here for them to have some sneaky good games. And then that last game, I think, is where you absolutely want to ideally play the Patriots defense. At number 11, I've got the Broncos. Feels really weird having them this far down, but I can't really see it any other way. I just can't. The Commanders actually kind of worked their defense last night, which was actually bizarre to watch. But the Broncos I still do view as one of the top 3 defenses in the league. But I will say this schedule cannot be overlooked. Versus Green Bay, versus the Jags, at Kansas City. That defense is, I don't know if it can hold up for 3 dominant games in fantasy. But the one thing I'll say is this. The ultimate reason they're here inside the top 12 still is because they've done largely well. They're the sack leader in all of NFL this year. I can't keep them outside of the top 12 based on resume this year and based on the return of Pat Surtain, and all of their guys are basically healthy. I cannot keep them outside the top 12. And the Bills defense, they're my wild card that snuck into this top 12. So the Bills, they go to New England, they play the Patriots, not a great matchup. But at Cleveland, you want to take advantage of that. And that Philly matchup, that one could go really well. And I will also say this about the Bills. They're very similar to the Steelers' defense. They're very similar to other defenses that generate turnovers, but don't always hold opponents to very few points. But that Philly matchup, Philly's not putting up many points, and Cleveland isn't either. So I do think that they get kind of the best of both worlds there, where they can force some turnovers, get after the quarterback, and keep them to a low-scoring outcome those last 2 weeks, enough for them to be inside the top 12. And when you look at the top 12 this time compared to the last time I did these playoff defense rankings, it's actually drastically different because there's been a lot of changes that are being made and a lot of teams advancing and a lot of teams falling backwards. And I think the Bills just entered into the top 12 just based on this past week against the Steelers. So let me know what you think of the playoff defense rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the top 12 kicker rankings for the fantasy playoffs, click on this video right here.